When paramedics arrived at that home in Derbyshire, they found rigor mortis already setting in, and a baby whose body held 39 broken ribs, 39 fractures, on a 10-month-old boy. This is the story of Jacob Crouch. On the morning of December 30th, 2020, emergency services received a call that would unravel one of the most distressing child abuse cases in recent British history. 10-month-old Jacob Crouch was found unresponsive in his cot at the family home in Linton, near Swadlincote in Derbyshire. When paramedics arrived, they immediately noticed something was terribly wrong. Rigor mortis had already set in, suggesting Jacob had been dead far longer than his caregivers claimed. Visible bruising covered his tiny body, bruises that told a story of sustained abuse stretching back months. The paramedics called police, as protocol demands for unexpected child deaths. What investigators would uncover was a pattern of systematic torture, inflicted by the very people who should have protected him. Jacob's short life had been marked by unimaginable pain, and his death was entirely preventable had his caregivers sought medical help, instead of prioritizing their own self-preservation. The story begins in 2019 when Gemma Barton, then 4 months pregnant with her first child, met Craig Crouch on the dating website Plenty of Fish. Gemma's relationship with the biological father, Andrew Smith, had ended badly, with Smith convicted of assaulting Gemma. Vulnerable and seeking stability, Gemma was quickly swept into a whirlwind romance with Crouch. Within a month, Crouch was referring to her unborn child as our little boy. He isolated her from friends and family, moving them to South Derbyshire. Crouch was a master of deception, claiming to be a JCB director, earning a 6-figure salary, when in reality, he worked as a forklift driver. He also claimed to have met Boris Johnson. These lies were not merely exaggerated boasts, but calculated manipulations designed to present himself as a successful, powerful figure, a persona that would enable him to exert complete control over Gemma and the child to come. When Jacob was born on February 17, 2020, he was a perfectly healthy baby boy. However, Craig Crouch insisted on being named as the father on Jacob's birth certificate, despite having no biological connection to the child. This was an overreach that signaled his need for ownership and control. The family settled into a small rented home on Foxley Chase, and to outsiders, they appeared to be a normal family, but cracks were already forming. New relationships and newborn babies create immense pressure even under the best circumstances. For Gemma and Craig, the stress of parenthood exposed Crouch's true nature. He demanded a regimental approach to parenting, expecting an infant to comply with rigid rules. His love bombing had worked initially, but now the mask was slipping. The house was small enough that every sound could be heard, and soon, those sounds would include the cries of a baby in agony. Text messages between the couple, later recovered by police, revealed a culture of cruelty that was nothing short of horrific. In June 2020, Crouch told Gemma she needed to be more regimental with Jacob and to not let this take over us, meaning the baby was interfering with their relationship. He was using their relationship as a weapon against a helpless infant. Other messages showed they referred to Jacob as the devil, projecting their own failings onto an innocent child. They discussed feeding him his own vomit as punishment and smacking him because he was crying for no reason. The idea that a baby would cry for no reason demonstrates a complete lack of understanding of child development. They also discussed putting him in a bath, 3 foot deep, with hot water and bleach, a comment Crouch would later dismiss as banter. These messages were not idle talk. They documented an escalating pattern of abuse that would eventually end a child's life. The physical evidence of Jacob's suffering was overwhelming. An autopsy revealed that Jacob had died from peritonitis, caused by a traumatic bowel perforation, the result of a brutal blow or stamp to his abdomen. The injuries were so severe that a forensic pathologist compared them to those sustained in a car crash or a fall from a multi-story building. But the fatal injury was only part of the horror. When Jacob died, he had 39 rib fractures, 22 of which occurred in the final week of his life. The fractures were caused on 4 separate occasions, the result of Jacob being squeezed with tremendous force. He also had 19 visible bruises on his body, including on his cheeks and ear, locations that are classic indicators of non-accidental injury. The rib fractures would have made every breath agonizing. The peritonitis would have caused intense abdominal pain, nausea, fever, and ultimately sepsis. The 999 call made on the morning of Jacob's death provides chilling insight into the mindset of his abusers. Craig Crouch remained remarkably calm throughout the call, describing Jacob as stone cold and telling the operator he believed the baby was beyond any help. His language was clinical and detached, lacking the raw emotion expected from a parent who has just discovered their child dead. He claimed Gemma had checked on Jacob at 5 a.m. and found him fine, yet by 7 a.m., rigor mortis had set in, a biological process that would have required several hours to develop. Crouch's story contradicted basic medical reality. The operator repeatedly attempted to guide him through CPR, but Crouch's responses were flat and disengaged. Even as a child lay dead in his home, Crouch seemed more concerned with constructing a narrative than with the tragedy unfolding. This detachment would be a recurring theme throughout the investigation and trial. The autopsy confirmed what paramedics and police had suspected from the moment they arrived. Jacob Crouch had not died from sudden infant death syndrome, as his parents claimed in a bizarre letter they delivered to neighbors. He died from blunt force trauma. The peritonitis that killed him was directly caused by a tear in his bowel, a catastrophic injury that would have required immense force to inflict upon such a small child. The prosecution stated that Jacob had been a victim of a culture of cruelty for at least 6 months before his death. Both parents were responsible for this environment. They encouraged and applauded each other in the control and punishment of a baby. Neither called for help during Jacob's suffering. Neither sought medical assistance when his ribs were broken, when he was in agony. Had they taken him to a hospital at any point during those 6 months, Jacob could have been saved. During the 7-week trial at Derby Crown Court, the prosecution presented damning evidence of the abuse Jacob had endured. The jury heard how Jacob was a happy, smiley, wobbly baby who continued to smile despite the horrific treatment. Video footage showed Crouch dunking Jacob in a paddling pool in May 2020, holding him under the water. When questioned, Crouch claimed he didn't think he did anything wrong. Another video showed Jacob in a high chair with a visible bruise on his cheek in the week before his death. Crouch denied any involvement, claiming Jacob's injuries could have been caused by falling over or hitting himself with a toy, a suggestion dismissed by experts as not remotely possible. He claimed he wished he'd noticed something, but maintained he had seen nothing. He also claimed to love children and to have supported Jacob from the start. The verdicts brought a measure of justice for Jacob, though it could never bring him back. Craig Crouch was found guilty of murder and 3 counts of child cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years. In passing sentence, the judge described the case as an abuse of trust of the grossest kind and noted that Crouch had shown no remorse. Gemma Barton was cleared of murder and manslaughter, but found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child and 1 count of child cruelty. She was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. The judge acknowledged her history of mental health issues and her vulnerability to coercion, but stated she had failed in her duty as Jacob's main carer. She wept in the dock as the sentence was read, but her tears could not undo the months of suffering she had allowed her son to endure. Jacob Crouch was one of 36 children who lost their lives in the UK during the 2020 lockdown period, when children were cut off from their usual support systems and more vulnerable to serious harm. His biological father, Andrew Smith, issued a heartbreaking statement saying he would never hear his son call him dad, never witness his first steps, never buy him his first pint. Jacob's maternal grandfather spoke of how the family never liked Craig Crouch and found his lies unbelievable. The detective in charge of the case said Jacob had been born into a culture of cruelty, where the people he should have trusted above all others subjected him to assault after assault. Jacob's memory should live on as a reminder of the vulnerability of children and the responsibility we all share to protect them. He deserved so much better.